Good Tavach, good Tavach. Chaim Racha. There is a theme that the previous Rebbe shared in the last Shoshana that he was in this world, and that theme is unique. And although he only shared it once, Rebbe said that this is a message for every single Rosh Hashanah till Mashiach comes. What he said at that farbrengen was that mimer was that Rosh Hashanah is a time of tremendous joy. And Hashem specifically makes Rosh Hashanah a time of harvest because Hashem wants us to feel like a farmer at a time of harvest who has all the fruits in his basket. Hashem wants us to feel that all the brachas are for sure coming. And we're not going to shul, and we're not davening because of our fear of judgment. Instead, we have absolute certainty, as Rebbe just mentioned in the Sikha we saw, that Hashem will give us all good. And that's why it's a custom to wear white the day before Shoshana. The white celebratory garments emphasize how we are positive that Hashem will give us a good sweet year. And as we, this morning, as we read in the Torah, you're all standing here together. And Baal Shem Tov says this means that Hashem blesses us to be standing and be victorious in judgment. That's the theme that a Jew has to have in his mind. That is what brings all of God's blessings. So on that note, I wanted to share with you the source of the teaching that we're all familiar with, the teaching of Trachut v'Zayin think good and it'll be good. This teaching was shared by the previous Rebbe in Taf Reish Tzadik Dalet by Yeshua's farbrengen. It's a beautiful farbrengen. It's a long farbrengen. I'm not going to be able to share the whole thing today. Just share the first part of the farbrengen, and Rish Hashem next week, continue with this farbrengen. And in Taf Reish Dalet, which I think is 1934, 1934, the previous Rebbe begins and says like this: my father, when he would share the deepest concepts in chassidus, and he used to say the following: that when you understand something, after it's already been accepted and absorbed, and you delve deeply into this concept, it's similar to someone who has seen a beautiful painting and is looking at that painting and marveling at the splendor of the painting. That's how the similar experience is after you understood something and you're like looking and reviewing what you've seen. And very often the Rebbe Cashapp would say the following words: when someone works and toils with body and soul to understand a section of the revealed parts of Torah or a concept in an interdimension of Torah, so until he understands it, well, it takes a lot of effort going back and forth. But after it makes sense to him, he looks at it and he, like someone who looks at a beautiful painting, because this concept has now become fully crystallized in his mind, just like a picture that you see with your eyes. So the previous Rebbe continues and says that there's a great power of imagination. And through imagination, a person is able to picture something that they've lived through and that is very beneficial in the service of Hashem. The Tzemach Tzedek says that someone who has the power of imagination has an easier time doing tshuva and is able to create a real sense of reverence and love for Hashem and feel it physically in his heart. Which is the mitzvah. Loving Hashem is supposed to, it says in Ayom Yom, is supposed to be so so it's supposed to be such a tangible feeling, similar to when you see a good friend you haven't seen for a while. It causes actual feeling in your heart, so that even if that day you have all kinds of things that were bothering you, you feel better by seeing the good friend. So in Chassidus, there are many different pieces of advice for how to correct our intellect and our emotions and our character, and how to correct different habits that we got used to. There's an advice that Chassidus gives for all these different kinds of things. So one of the things the previous Rebbe says that all chassidim and all bachrim, all yeshiva students should make an effort to custom themselves in is imagination. Everyone who learned in the yeshiva in Lubavitch, says the previous Rebbe, he remembers a simchas Torah or a farbrengen, or yuteskisse farbrengen. And everyone who was in Lubavitch, who heard a discourse, who was in a private audience, who was by the resting place of the Friedrich Rebbe's ancestors, his father and grandfather, and great-grandfather, he has to picture this in his mind, and this memory of this holy image, which he saw and re-experiences while he re-experiences something he saw before in the city of Lubavitch. This power of thought has no limitations in space, and just like it has no limitations in space, it also has no limitations in time. So a person can use their power, their memory about very old things which happened to them when they were a child, and these memories, living deeply into those memories, can actually bring back those same feelings as you had before. So the previous Rebbe continues and says about himself and his own power of imagination. He says, when I was 5 years old, I was with my parents in a city called Yalta, and we used to walk on the mountains. And I used to play next to my father. My father would often ask me, "What do I remember?" And he used to ask me this about memories that I had when I was younger. And by sharing the different memories that I had, he would cause these memories to become engraved in my mind, and he would explain to me the things that I've seen. And through accustoming the previous Rebbe to use his power of imagination to recall these memories, previous Rebbe said I was able to engrave into my mind the image of the Holy of Holies of the Rebbe Marash, which I only saw him when I was 2 years old and 3 months. So in the year Taf Reish Nun, which was the year that it was the first year when the Rebbe Rashab had to be out of his home for almost the entire year. And he would talk with the previous Rebbe and ask him again, what do you remember? What you remember when you were very young? Asking that, at such a young age, what he remembers from before. And by doing this, he created this tendency, this characteristic in the previous Rebbe, that the various events that he experienced, especially Hasidic farbrengens, became very strongly engraved in his mind. And it also generated this tendency and this desire to relive old memories. So also now the previous Rebbe said, this is talking in Taf Reish Shalik Daled many years later, is when I've 20 years of exile, moving from place to place, from one place to another, but these memories are like living waters, cold waters that refresh me. The goodness that imagination brings is something that's vivid, and everyone can know this and feel this in their life literally. If someone would think deeply in the image of a farbrengen of Vitas Kislev or Simchas Torah in Lubavitch, and he will arouse his memories to remind himself of all the details that happened there, the picture, the image of the Holy of Holies of the Rebbe, the devotion of all of the teachers of the yeshiva to the Rebbe, how they would listen with such attention, and the happiness and the sense of reverence of all the attendants, the heartfelt songs, the words, the faces of their friends. Without a doubt, when a person does this, this causes the person to literally become immersed in that in that goodness, and he becomes again filled with that light and that goodness. How good were the walls of the yeshiva of Timchet Timim? How enjoyable was it to see the face of the Holy of Holies, the beloved sweet smile that caused of Rebbe Cashapp, of his father, which caused every pained heart to feel better, and caused every stony heart to become soft. And how sweet was it to hear the holy talks of my father. Chassidim and the yeshiva students, which were in Lubavitch by a farbrengen or in a private audience, have unlimited treasures. And every farbrengen and every audience is a treasure for all kinds of physical and spiritual good. If someone has a power of imagination and he pictures to himself his audience with the Rebbe, and he thinks over in detail what he said, what he asked, and the answer with the language of the blessing that he received, it lifts him out of the folly of sleep, and he becomes renewed with life. There are no words that can express the comfort and the hope that such a memory brings. How it makes your life, your physical life, easier. How it brings light and into your daily life, and it creates a feeling of resolve and ambition to continue serving Hashem in your life. In Lubavitch, in the yeshiva, there was one of the teachers. His name was Rabbi Moshe. The previous Rebbe said that when he was younger, before he became a spiritual mentor in the yeshiva Lubavitch, unfortunately, one of his children became sick. The doctors didn't know any kind of cure, and there was nothing they could do. Rabbi Moshe went to his friends, and he told them this bitter situation, and the Chassidim strengthened him and told him not to be sad. God will for sure have Rahmanis, and he should immediately travel to the city of Lubavitch. Rabbi Moshe started to cry. And he said, I would like to go to the Rebbe, but the doctors are saying that there are only a few hours. So why should he go? So one of the older Chassidim spoke to him very strongly and said to him, the Gemara says that a person should never withhold the possibility, should never reject the possibility of Hashem having mercy on him. So certainly, said this chassid to Rabbi Moshe, certainly the angels of God, the defending angels, will affect Hashem, that he will wait with a decision until you go to the Rebbe. One of the chassidim, who was a tailor by profession and a friend of Rabbi Moshe, went with Rabbi Moshe to Lubavitch. When they arrived in Lubavitch, Rabbi Moshe was fortunate enough to go immediately to have an audience with the Rebbe. Rabbi Moshe said, when I went into the Rebbe, I gave him my pigeon, I gave him my request for blessing for my son, for my child. And while I handed this to the Tzemach Tzedek, while I handed this to the Rebbe, I had this thought in my mind, who knows what is happening with my child? The doctor said that it's going to be only a couple of hours. So I started to cry and cry. So the Rebbe read my letter, and he's told me, don't cry. Think good, and it will be good. Don't complain. You will be by the bar mitzvahs of your grandchildren. So the Mechol said, in every hard time in my life, the Mechol had, unfortunately, a hard time raising his children. When every hard time that he had with his children, he said, I pictured to myself the holy face of the Rebbe and the words that he told me in this audience, and I felt good. So the previous Rebbe said, this is what helped him feel better in a physical way. His memory of the words of the Rebbe. That's what caused things to become better physically. And especially spiritually, good memories are a pillar of light and a pillar of fire that illuminates the mind and warms the heart. And every generation, the Hasidic farbrengen was one of the pillars of the building of educating Hasidim. The power of imagination is one of the most important powers of the soul, which brings great benefit both in understanding the intellectual realm of chassidus and in our service of Hashem. And our Rebbes said it's very precious to have this power of imagination. The Tzemach Tzedek said a long story about Levi Tzibeditchev, which highlights the great power of imagination. Next week, I will share that story of Levi Tzibeditchev. It's really an amazing story. But meanwhile, let's say l'chaim for all those need refuah shlema, especially my dear friend Reb Shmuel Chatzkolovich's daughter, who's 2 years old, needs refuah shlema. Her name again is, one second, Sheina Henya Tzipora Bas Chaya Cheved and Amitai Ben Shoshana. Only refuah creation. Anyone say any names? L'chaim, we should track about Zang, which is the immediate refuah shlema kreva for them. L'chaim v'racha.
Amen.